Hey everyone, Nigel and Luke here, and welcome to Crime Zone. It's no secret that in our culture, we tend to elevate celebrities to an almost mythical status. Much of this is due to the perceived glamour and unimaginable wealth that usually accompanies fame. Things that society often erroneously equate with the perfect life. That's why, when terrible things happen to famous people, it can be especially shocking. It forces us to confront the fact that even those of us that, quote, have it all, are not immune to tragedy. Today, we wanted to take a look at the ultimate example of this, focusing on cases where celebrities were either the victims or the perpetrators in brutal murder cases. And for a list like this, we figured where better to turn than to the epicenter of American celebrity itself, Los Angeles. Just a heads up, we've decided to turn this list into a two-part video in an effort to balance both the length and the detail we cover in each of these cases. In order to have a good mix of the most well-known cases in both videos, we have opted to present the stories in no particular order in terms of their severity or notoriety. Before we get to our list, don't forget to like and subscribe to Crime Zone for more true crime content like this. It really helps us to continue building the channel, and if you've watched a bunch of our videos already, you might not even realize that you're not subscribed. While you're there, make sure to hit the notification bell to stay up to date with our latest releases. As always, we are extremely grateful for everyone who has taken the time to watch and help support the channel. With that out of the way, here is the first part of 10 notorious LA murders involving celebrities.
In the years leading up to his death, actor Sal Mineo's career was not what it had once been. Though he had been thrust into the limelight as a teenager after co-starring with James Dean in Rebel Without a Cause, his transition to adult roles had proven difficult. This trend was escalated by prejudice towards his bisexuality, something which had effectively nixed his chances of being considered for leading roles. Still, Mineo managed to persevere in Hollywood, eventually appearing in movies like The Longest Day and Escape from the Planet of the Apes. At the time of his murder, at just 37 years old, he had been cast in the play P.S. Your Cat is Dead, a role for which he had received substantial positive publicity. Tragically, his attempt to turn his career around would ultimately be cut short. On the night of February 12, 1976, Mineo returned to his West Hollywood apartment after rehearsal. Moments after he parked his car behind the building, neighbors heard cries for help and saw a man with brown hair fleeing the scene. By the time help arrived, Mineo was on the brink of death, the result of a deep stab wound to the chest that had pierced his heart. He would succumb to the injury minutes later. For 2 years, police searched without success for Mineo's killer. It is believed the investigation may have been hindered because authorities assumed that the crime had something to do with the actor's personal life, placing significant emphasis on his sexuality. However, it turned out that Mineo was simply the victim of a violent mugging. A man named Lionel Ray Williams eventually became a person of interest in the case when police in Michigan said they had overheard him bragging about committing the crime after he was arrested for passing bad checks. Though he later claimed these stories weren't true, his wife back in LA told police that on the night of Mineo's murder, Williams had come home covered in blood. Though there initially appeared to be a discrepancy between what eyewitnesses had seen on the night of the killing and Williams' appearance, his wife was also able to provide police with an old photo of her husband where his black hair had been chemically straightened and dyed brown. Williams was convicted of the murder in March of 1979 and received a life sentence.
Though there are sadly many stories of talented comedians who died before their time, few are as sudden or tragic as the death of Phil Hartman. Hartman gained popularity after joining the cast of Saturday Night Live in 1986, where he became known for his impressions. The comedian was on the show for 8 seasons, after which he left to star in the sitcom News Radio. During this time, Hartman also began to appear in small movie roles in films like House Guest, Sergeant Bilko, and Jingle All the Way. He also famously voiced various characters on The Simpsons, such as Troy McClure and Lionel Hutz. However, while Hartman's professional life flourished, he had consistent problems in his personal life. Chief among these was his rocky relationship with his wife Bryn. The couple got married in 1987, after meeting each other on a blind date a year earlier. They had 2 children, Sean and Bergen. Bryn had been a recovering alcoholic at the time that she had met Hartman, and soon after their marriage, she began to struggle with her addiction once again. According to those that were close to her, she was intimidated by her husband's success and frequently lashed out at the women in his life. Her jealousy often reportedly caused her to become verbally and physically abusive, to the point at which Hartman would sometimes take the children to stay with other members of the family. However, the problems in the marriage were hardly one-sided. Hartman was often absent because of his demanding work schedule and could be passive and emotionally distant. Hartman's relationship with Bryn had also come on the heels of 2 previously failed marriages. Still, according to friends and family, neither Hartman nor Bryn wanted the marriage to end. They both knew the relationship was strained, but insisted that it could be fixed, even as Bryn's drug and alcohol problem continued to grow in severity. This insistence would turn out to have tragic consequences. On the night of May 27, 1998, Bryn returned home from dinner with a friend. She and Hartman got into a heated argument about a recent incident in which Bryn had hit their daughter while under the influence of alcohol. The fight ended with Hartman threatening to leave his wife if the behavior continued, after which he went to bed. Shortly after 6 a.m., Los Angeles police received a call about shots fired at the Hartman residence. The call had been made by Bryn's friend Ron Douglas, who had agreed to accompany her home after she showed up at his house and told him that she had murdered her husband. Douglas had initially refused to believe Bryn's story until he saw Hartman's lifeless body laying on the bed in the couple's room. Bryn told Douglas that 3 hours earlier she had entered the bedroom while her husband was sleeping and shot him 3 times, once between the eyes, once in the throat, and once in the upper chest. She had been taking the antidepressant Zoloft while drinking heavily and using cocaine. When police arrived, they escorted Douglas and the Hartmans' 2 children from the house, by which time Bryn had locked herself in her bedroom. She committed suicide shortly after police got to the scene. Following the horrific murder-suicide, there was a tremendous outpouring of grief, particularly from those who had worked alongside Hartman in the comedy world. Several years after his death, Hartman was inducted into both the Canada and Hollywood Walks of Fame.
While Sam Cooke is rightly remembered for his overwhelming contributions to American music, questions about his tragic death continue to hang like storm clouds over his legacy, even after more than 50 years. Cooke stood out early in his career, beginning when he was a gospel singer with a group called the Soul Stirrers. By his mid-20s, he had already earned the nickname King of Soul, and as a solo artist would go on to write and record mega hits such as You Send Me, Cupid, and Chain Gang. He was also one of the first modern black performers to achieve success on the business side of his musical career, founding a record label and publishing company. Cooke also used his influence to take an active part in the civil rights movement, often chafing against the unjust rules of the era and refusing to perform at segregated venues. With dozens of US top 40 hits between 1957 and 1964, it seemed as though the musician was destined to stay on top of the industry for decades to come. No one could have predicted the tragedy that would follow. On the evening of December 10, 1964, Cooke was hanging out at Martoni's Italian restaurant, a Hollywood hotspot. While talking with friends and buying drinks for people he knew at the bar, the musician met 22-year-old Elisa Boyer. The two eventually left the restaurant together a few hours later. At approximately 2 a.m., the pair checked into the Hacienda Motel, an establishment known for its low hourly rates that catered to short-term guests. Sam Cooke would be dead within an hour. What we know from here is based on the accounts of Boyer, as well as the motel's manager, Bertha Franklin. According to Boyer, she had never wanted to go to the hotel with Cooke. She would later tell police that she had asked to be taken home, but instead the musician had checked them in at the Hacienda. Boyer claimed that when they arrived in the room, Cooke pinned her down on the bed, and she believed that he intended to sexually assault her. When Cooke went to the bathroom, she seized her chance and grabbed a handful of both of their clothes and fled. She said that she got dressed after making it about a block away, abandoning Cooke's shirts and pants on the ground. While this was happening, Bertha Franklin heard pounding on the door of her motel office. She claimed that Cooke rushed in and demanded to know Boyer's whereabouts while he grabbed her by her wrist. He was dressed in a single shoe and a sport jacket. Franklin would tell investigators that as Cooke continued to demand answers, he became progressively rougher with her and she began to fear for her safety. During the struggle, she managed to grab her pistol, firing 3 shots. One of them struck Cooke in the chest, piercing his heart. In shock over what had just happened, the musician's last words were reportedly, "Lady, you shot me." By the time police could arrive, Cooke was already dead. After interviewing Boyer and Franklin, investigators quickly reached a definitive conclusion. The incident was ruled a justifiable homicide within a week of Cook's death. However, Cook's friends and supporters weren't so sure about the official narrative. Many who saw his body said that it was in unusually bad condition considering the version of events that had been told. To some, it looked as though Cook had been badly beaten. When Boyer was arrested for prostitution a month later, rumors continued to swirl. Years later, in 1979, she would be found guilty of the second-degree murder of an ex-boyfriend. Boyer's record has caused some to speculate that she may have attempted to rob Cook on the night of his death and that it simply went wrong. Still, others believe a more conspiratorial reason is to blame for the musician's untimely death. In particular, some believe that Cook's involvement in civil rights was seen as a threat, and that his death had been planned by enemies of the movement. Believers of this theory say that the murder was covered up by the LAPD. Whatever your view on the matter, there's no denying that the death of Sam Cooke was a tragic end to the life of an artist who likely had much more to offer. At the time, hundreds of thousands of fans mourned his death. Fittingly, his song, "A Change Is Gonna Come," became one of the anthems of the civil rights era.
There are few celebrity deaths that have attracted the level of lasting intrigue and speculation as the unsolved murder of rapper Christopher Wallace, also known as the Notorious B.I.G. or Biggie Smalls. The murder took place at the height of the infamous East Coast-West Coast rivalry, a feud between fans and artists of the two major hip-hop scenes in the United States. Though the killing is understandably talked about in combination with the murder of rapper Tupac Shakur, for the purposes of this list, we will only be discussing Biggie's death, since it was the one that took place in Los Angeles. In February of 1997, Biggie traveled to LA to promote his upcoming second studio album, Life After Death, as well as record a music video for his single Hypnotize. During an interview shortly after his arrival, he stated that he had hired security because of concerns about his safety. In his mind, the threat was all the more serious due to the murder of Tupac, which had occurred just 6 months earlier. On March 7th, Biggie presented an award to Toni Braxton at the Soul Train Music Awards. Although the atmosphere at the event was not as contentious as it had been at the previous year's award ceremony, Biggie was still booed by some of the audience, a sign of the simmering tensions between the East and West Coast rap scenes. The day after the event, Biggie attended an after-party hosted by Vibe Magazine and Quest Records at the Peterson Automotive Museum in West LA. In addition to stars like Faith Evans, Aaliyah, and Sean Diddy Combs, members of the Bloods and Crips gang were also in attendance. When the party was broken up just after midnight by the LA Fire Department due to overcrowding, Biggie left with his entourage. The crew traveled in 2 Chevrolet Suburbans, while the record label's head of security trailed in a different vehicle. Biggie was in the first SUV in the front passenger seat, accompanied by Damian D-Rock Butler, Junior Mafia member Little C's, and driver Gregory G. Money Young. Diddy was in the second SUV with 3 bodyguards. At approximately 12:45 a.m., Biggie's SUV pulled up to a red light at the corner of Wilshire Boulevard and South Fairfax Avenue. The streets were crowded with guests leaving the event. As Biggie and his friends waited at the light, a dark-colored Chevy Impala pulled up alongside them. The driver rolled down his window, drew a 9mm pistol, and fired into Biggie's Suburban. The rapper was struck 4 times and was rushed to the Cedars-Sinai Medical Center, where emergency surgery was performed. Sadly, too much damage had been done, and Biggie would succumb to his injuries. He was just 24 years old. When the rapper's medical records were released more than a decade later, in 2012, it would be revealed that it was the final bullet that struck Biggie, which had proven fatal. The subsequent investigation into Biggie's murder remains one of the most controversial and revisited in the history of US pop culture. Immediate connections were made to the killing of Tupac Shakur, who died in an almost identical manner, and this gave rise to a host of different theories. Chief among these is the idea that Biggie had been involved in arranging Tupac's murder, and that his own murder had been planned as revenge. However, no definitive evidence has ever emerged to suggest that Biggie was involved in Tupac's death. Suspects over the years have ranged from random members of both the Bloods and the Crips, as well as more high-profile figures in the hip-hop industry. A 2002 book by journalist Randall Sullivan famously accused Death Row Records co-founder Suge Knight of conspiring with corrupt LAPD officer David Mack to kill Biggie, and to make both his and Tupac's deaths look like the result of their rap rivalry. Sullivan based his claims off of information provided by retired LAPD detective Russell Poole. Other theories have zeroed in on Diddy as a person of interest in the murder, alleging that he refused to fully cooperate with the investigation and told his associates to do the same. The result of the overwhelming torrent of speculation in the case has created a situation where it's difficult to know what to make of any of the theories about the murder, casting serious doubt as to whether it can really ever be solved. Countless incendiary books, documentaries, and films of varying quality have examined the killing over the years, with many seeming to muddy the waters rather than provide any real insight. It's worth noting that Biggie's family actually filed multiple wrongful death suits against the city of Los Angeles based on the claims made by Detective Poole, but were ultimately unsuccessful in court. The suit survived multiple iterations until 2010, when it was finally dismissed.
There are few crimes in U.S. history that have managed to maintain the kind of lasting hold on the public imagination as the Manson family murders. The killings are remembered for signaling a bitter end to the free love spirit of 60s counterculture, giving way to the grittier and darker atmosphere of the 1970s. The crimes are also thought of as the genesis of America's concerns about the influence of the occult in popular culture, fears that would soon give rise to the decades-long phenomenon known as satanic panic. Though the Manson family murders refer to two separate incidents that took place over 2 nights, for the purposes of this list we will only be covering the killings involving Sharon Tate, the actress and wife of director Roman Polanski. On the night of August 8, 1969, 4 members of the Manson family cult headed to Tate and Polanski's Benedict Canyon home on Cielo Drive at the instruction of leader Charles Manson. The group consisted of Tex Watson, Susan Atkins, Linda Kasabian, and Patricia Krenwinkel, and had been told by Manson to, quote, totally destroy everyone inside. The location of the crime was not random. The Cielo Drive home had previously been the residence of Hollywood actress Candice Bergen and record producer Terry Melcher, with whom Manson had once been friends. However, when Manson had failed to receive a record deal from Melcher, the relationship soured, and Manson had incorporated the anger over his failed music career into the broader narrative of his cult's ideology. To Manson, the Cielo Drive house became a symbol of Hollywood itself. Of course, the location also worked for practical reasons, as Manson was already familiar with the home's layout. At the same time that the Manson family finalized the details of their gruesome plans, Sharon Tate was relaxing with friends. The 8.5 months pregnant actress had invited several people over for a quiet evening while her husband was in Europe. In addition to Tate was her ex-fiancé Jay Sebring, aspiring screenwriter Wojciech Frykowski, and Abigail Folger, heiress to the Folgers' coffee fortune. It is thought that the group may have gone out to dinner that night before returning to Tate's residence around 10 p.m. By the time the Manson family arrived after midnight, they were all asleep in the house. When Manson's followers got to Cielo Drive, they started by cutting the phone lines to Tate's house. They then parked their car at the bottom of the hill that led to the estate and walked back up, deciding to avoid entering through the gate in case it was electrified or equipped with an alarm. Instead, the group climbed through a bush-covered embankment to the right. When they entered the property, they noticed headlights coming towards them. Watson ordered the women to lie in the bushes as he approached the vehicle. The unfortunate driver was 18-year-old Stephen Parent, who had been visiting the property's caretaker. Watson pointed a .22 caliber revolver at Parent, who began to beg for his life, promising that he would not say anything. Watson lunged at Parent with a knife, slashing the palm of one of his hands so severely that it severed tendons and tore his watch off his wrist. Watson then shot the teenager 4 times in the chest and abdomen, killing him. The group then pushed Parent's car farther up the driveway. Watson then told Kasabian to keep watch down by the gate as he cut the screen of a window and entered the house, opening the front door for Atkins and Krenwinkel once inside. The first person to realize the presence of the intruders was Frykowski, who had been asleep on the living room couch. As Watson began to kick Frykowski in the head, he asked who he was and what he was doing there. Watson replied, quote, "I'm the devil, and I'm here to do the devil's business." While this was happening, Atkins and Krenwinkel tracked down the home's other 3 occupants and forced them into the living room to be restrained. Once there, Watson began to tie Tate and Sebring together by their necks with a rope, which he then slung over one of the ceiling beams. Alarmed by the intruders' treatment of Tate, he tried to get them to stop, but was shot by Watson and then stabbed 7 times. As Sebring was being murdered, Frykowski managed to free himself from his restraints and began to struggle with Atkins, who stabbed at his legs with a knife. Though he managed to fight his way to the door and out onto the porch, Watson eventually caught up, striking him over the head with his gun multiple times before stabbing him and shooting him twice. Folger also briefly managed to escape, fleeing out a bedroom door to the home's pool area. However, Krenwinkel caught up to her and tackled her onto the front lawn and stabbed her. Watson eventually joined in on the attack, and the pair stabbed Folger a total of 28 times. Watson then returned to Frykowski to finish him off as he crawled across the lawn. He suffered 51 stab wounds. After witnessing the gruesome murders of her friends, Tate pleaded with her attackers to let her live long enough to give birth, offering herself up as a hostage. But Atkins and Watson callously finished the job they had been sent to do, stabbing Tate 16 times and killing her. As a final horrifying act, Atkins wrote the word pig on the front door of the house in Tate's blood, something Manson had instructed her to do in order to distract police so they might think the crime had a racial motivation or had something to do with the occult. This tactic actually worked for a short time, as even though the LaBianca murders happened just one day later, investigators initially did not think that they were related. It would take several more months before the killers responsible for the gut-wrenching murders were arrested, after police eventually connected the brutal crimes to a couple of other killings that Manson was responsible for. The sensational 1971 trial that followed made Charles Manson and his supporters a household name, forever enshrining him as one of America's greatest boogeymen. Manson was ultimately convicted on 9 counts of first-degree murder, and he and 4 of his followers who had been involved in the crimes were sentenced to death. The exception was Linda Kasabian, who had not been directly involved in the killings and managed to thwart Manson's third attempt at a home invasion. At trial, she testified for the prosecution. Shortly after the convictions, the Supreme Court of California ruled that the state's current death penalty laws were unconstitutional, and the sentences of Manson and his followers were commuted to life. Those who had not died in the ensuing years remained behind bars.
That brings us to the end of our list. Know of any other cases like this that you'd like to see covered in a future video? Tell us about them in the comments section below. As always, if you enjoyed our video, don't forget to like and subscribe to Crime Zone for more true crime content like this, making sure to hit the notification bell to stay up to date with our latest videos. Thank you for watching.